Today for math, you will need a red, a green, and a yellow. And you'll need to set up your math journal to look like this. There's a lot of writing going on, so it might take you a couple minutes. But the lesson title is to multiply or divide. That is the question. You can see that I used yellow to highlight all around the words. So you can do that with your yellow crayon, but push pause on your journal video until you get all of this written. Okay, so welcome back. You should have written all of this down. So it says, it is important to be able to identify what the operation is in a story problem. Deciding between multiplication and division can be tricky. Follow these steps for help deciding. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do if we're looking at a story problem is highlight or circle the important numbers in the story problem. That's the first thing we'll do. The second thing we'll do, so go ahead and slide it down and write in number 2. The second thing we'll do, and outline it in red, is highlight or circle the important key words in the story problem. So I'm going to go back to number 1 and I'm going to highlight or circle the important numbers in the story problem. So you're looking for the numbers, and you're also looking for key words in step number 2. Step number 3, you're going to use your brain and stop to think about what is really happening. This one is really important. It's so important that we're going to draw a pretty big stop sign in a minute. But go ahead and write, use your brain to stop and think. I would say use your brain and common sense. Or that would also mean like your experiences or things that you've noticed or have happened to you. So use your brain and common sense to stop and think about what is really happening. So we're going to draw us a pretty good stop sign right here. Remember, a stop sign is an octagon, so it needs to have 8 sides. There's 3. Okay, so use your brain and common sense to stop and think about what is really happening. This is the step that most people forget. They just move on and find the answer and think they've got it. Well, you really need to think about, well, are they taking pieces of it? So are they multiplying? Or are they splitting it up and dividing it with groups? There's a lot of different things that could be happening. So we're going to stop and use our common sense and our brain to think about what's really happening. All right, step number 4. Is draw off to the side the operation symbol. So it's either going to be today it's going to be multiply or divide, but in general it could be multiply, divide, add, or subtract, right? And we're using multiplication today as green. And we're using division as yellow. So draw off to the side the operation symbol. And then step number 5. You're going to solve the problem and make sure your answer makes sense. Solve the problem and make sure your answer makes sense. Put it in a complete sentence if it does. So if your answer makes sense, then you put it in a complete sentence. But you do not put it in a complete sentence if you haven't gone back to first make sure that it makes sense. Okay, so those are all of the steps. Let's review them. Step number 1, why don't you read it or whisper it to yourself while I read it. Step number 1, highlight or circle the important numbers in the story problem. Step number 2, highlight or circle the important keywords in the story problem. So we're looking for numbers and keywords. And then it says, use your brain and common sense to stop and think about what is really happening. Draw off to the side the operation symbol. Solve the problem and make sure your answer makes sense. Put it in a complete sentence if it does. Okay, so let's go ahead and get out our workbooks and find page 227. Again, we're going to get out our workbooks and tear out page 227. Make sure at the top that it says Unit 5, Lesson 10, Make Predictions. Okay, go ahead and find that. Leave your journal to the side because you'll want to refer back to all of those steps for help and get your name and number on this paper on page 227. Push pause on the video until you get that done. Okay, we're going to use our red to highlight important information. Remember, we're looking for numbers and keywords, and then we'll use green if it's multiply, and we'll use yellow if it's divide when we get to setting up and showing our work, okay? All right. Here we go. Farmer Ortigoza has 124.6 acres of land. Farmer Reuben has 0.8 times as much land as Farmer Ortigoza. So the first part is asking, does Farmer Reuben have more or less than 124.6, and how many acres does Farmer Reuben have? So we know our numbers are important, so we'll circle 124.6 and 0.8. What are some of the key words that we see in this story problem? Think about it. I see times as much. Do you see that? Okay, so I did step number 1 and 2. I highlighted the numbers and I highlighted keywords. So now I'm on step number 3. And remember, step number 3 is to use your brain and common sense to stop and think about what is really happening. And then we'll draw what the operation symbol is. So what's really happening? We're comparing these two farmers. And we know that one of them has this amount, the 124.6, and the other one has 0.8 times as much, or a piece of what this guy has. He has a decimal of what he has. So I'm just going to write off to the side. This is a piece of kind of problem, right? He has 0.8 times as much, or 0.8 a piece of 124.6. So the key words here are times as much, and me understanding it is it's taking a piece of it. So does the guy who has a fraction as much as this, does he have more or less than 124.6 acres? Well, he's going to have less because it was a piece of. I'm just going to put in parentheses, a piece of. Okay, that's why he has less. And then it says, how many acres does Farmer Reuben have? So we need to decide, is this multiply? If it's multiplication, we're going to use green. If it is division, we're going to use yellow. Think about it. If I take a piece of it, the word of should tell you multiply. So we're going to put these in green, and I'm going to go back and highlight for multiplication what I saw to help me. Times as much. Okay? But I want to be very clear. Excuse me. I want to be very clear that times doesn't always mean multiply. This situation, it did, but not always. Okay? That's why I had you think piece of, because it's a piece of 124.6. So it is multiplication. So to do multiplication with decimals, I have to remember a few things. So I'm going to show my work off to the side right here. I'm actually going to show it more to the left. You ready? It's 124.6 times 0.8. You do not have to line up the decimals. Mine just happened to do that. Remember decimal box? Let's use green for that, since we're using green for multiply. Well, first of all, the number that goes in the decimal box is 1, 2. And there's a 0 out in front, so it's a runt, and you can just get rid of it. So now it's like doing 1246 times 8. And then we'll put the decimal back in. Go ahead and solve it. That can't be right because it's much more than 124, but I have to put the decimal back in. Okay, I am now on step number 5. I solved the problem, and make sure your answer makes sense. Let's underline that in our journal. Make sure your answer makes sense. Put it in a complete sentence if it does. So let's take a look at that again. Could Farmer Reuben, he's supposed to have less than Farmer Ortigoza, could he have 99.68? Is 99.68 less than 124.6? Yes. So it makes sense. So how many acres does Farmer Reuben have? 99.68 acres. Okay, that was pretty fun. Let's work on the next one. Number 19. I love being detectives with story problems. I hope you are enjoying it. Find your red because we're going to highlight important stuff. Then we'll do the work and motions with the color that it is. Okay? So, Mi Young has 48 meters of crepe paper. Do you know what crepe paper is? It's like the stuff that you can, it's like streamers. You kind of hang it from the ceiling, or you can wrap things in it. It feels like tissue paper. I don't know. Anyway, it's called crepe paper. Mi Young has 48 meters of crepe paper. She will cut it into strips that are each 0.6 meter long. Okay, let's go with this. First of all, 48 is going to be important, and 0.6. What are some important keywords? Cut it. To cut something, what do we mean when we cut something? Think about that for a minute. And the word each. So she's going to take 48 meters and she's going to cut it into strips that are not even 1 meter. If she were to cut 48 meters and they were 1 meter, then she would get 48 strips, right? But she's cutting them into smaller pieces that are not, if you think about that, they are not going to be 1 meter or more. So she's going to have a lot of these. So will Mi Young get more or fewer than 48 strips? She's going to get more because she's cutting them into pieces that aren't even a meter. So for every meter, she's going to get more than one is what we're saying. So she's going to have more. So in this situation, the words cut it and each tell me that I'm going to be dividing. Did you catch that? This, oh, you know what we didn't do on step number 1? We didn't write multiplication. We didn't do step number 4. I'm so sorry about that. We did the multiplication, we just didn't write the symbol. Ooh, that's actually really important, so I'm sorry we forgot. So come down to this one. If she's cutting it into strips, she is dividing, my friends. She's dividing. Okay, well, which one is the dividend? It's what she has. The dividend is what she starts with, which is 48. So I do 48 divided by the size of the pieces, 0.6. This is the division problem. Will you make that division house in yellow? And now it's like we're reviewing how to do division when we have a decimal in the divisor. So you have to get rid of the decimal in the divisor, remember? So if I move this once, I also have to move this one once. Well, there's no decimal here. So you put 1 there, and if you were to move it once, you would end up needing another 0, right? You would need that 0 to be able to move it once. So we're rewriting the problem. Actually, I'm just going to rewrite the problem underneath it. I'm going to rewrite the problem right here. So when I moved this decimal once in the divisor, it changed 0.6 to just 6. Okay? When I moved the decimal once in the dividend, it changed it from 48 to 480. Remember, I'm timesing by 10 here. So to times 48 by 10 is 480. Whatever you do to the divisor, you have to do to the dividend. Okay, and this is pretty easy because 6 goes into 48 exactly 8 times. And remember, if it's exactly 8 times, then when you subtract and you find zeros and you bring down a 0, it's just going to be a 0 up in the quotient. So the answer is 80. Does this make sense? We're on step number 5. Is 80 more than 48? Yes. So it makes sense. How many strips will Mi Young get? She will get, oh, I guess we're supposed to put it in a complete sentence. They don't really allow that. So we're just going to say 80 strips. Do you know how long they would each be? 0.6 meters. 80 strips, 0.6 meters. Okay, number 20. Jen's garden is a rectangle with a length. I love area problems because it's always so easy to know what to do. Jen's garden is a rectangle with a length 3.5 meters and a width 0.75. So they're asking for is the area. Oh, you guys, is the area. So I have my 3.5, I have my 0.5. I know its length and width. So how do we find the area? You know that area equals length times width. So that's what we're going to be doing. Think about it for just a minute. If I take 3.5 times 0.75, I've got a decimal times a decimal. Remember when we do a decimal times a decimal, we're taking a piece, 0.75, a piece of 3.5. So it's going to be less. And you're going to put in parentheses again, this is a piece of. So because I said piece of, and because you know you're looking for area, this is multiplication. So let's solve it. 3.5 times 0.75. decimal box. Ooh, I've got a 0 out in front. Remember, the longer one's supposed to go on top. Whoops, I should have put the longer one on top. But it's okay because I'm crossing out the 0 because it's a runt and in front. So I cross it out. So it's just like doing 3.5 times 0.75. But now I'm going to get rid of the decimals by putting a number in the decimal box. So I have this one. So that's 1 and then 2 here. So if I have 1 on top and 2 on bottom, it's 3. A 3 goes in the decimal box. Okay, now do 35 times 75. It's a double digit. You're going to be plunking or flunking. Get a 0 there so you can move on for place value. And 7 times 5. Look and see if you got the same partial products as me. Oh, it looks like a really big number. But I bring the decimal box down. Do not forget that. You gotta move that 3 places. Okay, before I write it, is 2.625 less than 3.5? Yeah, so that does make sense. It makes sense. 2.625. And then because it's area, you have to say square meters. I'm just going to do SQ meters. Could you write meters squared with a little 2? Sure, you could, but we're not going to. All right, in the next video, we're going to tackle the next couple problems. So see you in the next video.